15. 10. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Nice. 70, turn left 2 plus, into right 4 plus. 70. Left 5 minus, 200. Long small crest, into a turn right 4, no cut, go 100. Right 4, no cut, go 100. Small crest 70, left 5 plus, go 200. Left 6, go 350. Right 5 plus, very long. Repeat, right 5 plus, very long, into small crest, into a left 5 over small crest, 250. Turn right 2 plus, 180.
Right 2 plus.
Right 2 plus, yes, what you said.
Next.
Right 5
Next.
over crest, long, 350. Turn left 2 plus, no cut. This is bumpy. Left 2 plus, no cut, bumpy. Down at the end. Into right 5 plus short, into a left 4 minus, into right 4 minus, no cut, 150. Stay right over small crest, into a left 5 plus, into a right 5 plus, tightens 4 minus, long. Repeat, 5 plus, tightens 4 minus, long, into small crest 200. Right 6 opens, 50. Caution, right 4 plus, no cut, into turn left 3 minus. Repeat, right 4 plus, no cut, into turn left 3 minus. There's your left 3 minus. Left 5 minus, 50. Left 6 plus. And I stay right over flat, long, small crest, 350. Caution crest, into a right 5 minus, down 50. Left 6 plus, 100. Left 6 plus, oh, there's your left 6 plus 100. Yep. Left 6 plus, into a small crest 70, yep. And a left 5 plus 50. Small crest, into a right 5. Into a left 5 opens over small crest, very long, go 200. Stay right over flat, long, small crest. Repeat, stay right over flat, long, small crest, 200. Mid over crest, 100. Right 5 plus, go 450. Chicane right entry. Left 3 minus, 70. Small jump into a left 5 plus. Into right 6 plus over crest, 70. And a left 5 plus, tightens. Into a right 4 over long crest, 70. Small crest, 100. Right 5 minus over long crest, 50. Left 4. Into right 5. And left 6. Into a right 5 over small crest. Into a left 5 plus long. Into small crest 50. Turn left 5 minus 50. Right 6 plus. There's your right 6 plus into a left 6 plus over small crest, 200. Crest stay mid into a right 5 minus, into a left 6, into a right 5 over crest, into a left 5 opens over small crest, into right 5 over small crest 50, turn left 4 minus, into right 6, into left 6 plus, 70, right 5 plus long, tightens, 70, left 5 opens, very long, okay, so left 5 opens very long, into small crest, into right 4 plus. Small crest into right 4 plus. Into a left 6, crest, into a right 5 plus, into a left 5 plus, long, tightens, into right 6, 300. Right 6 plus over small crest into a left 5 minus long, into small crest, into a right 6 over, into small jump, repeat, small crest, into a right 6, into small jump, kinks 150. Right 5 plus 100, finish, 50. Right 6 plus over small crest, 50. Good job.